Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Seven Figure Standard Podcast. I'm Mikey Stiller, joined by my co-host, Arash Vossoughi, and we are so happy to be with you for another episode. If you listened to last week's episode, you knew that this week's episode was going to be about standard. And we've done an episode on the podcast before about standard, but it has been quite some time. And I think it's time for a refresher. Arash actually brought that up on the last episode. So, Arash, I'm excited to dig in today. And what exactly do you want to start with as far as standard goes?
Well, even before we get in that, we've got to understand change is the first step to create a new future. And a lot of people are operating with the same standards they're comfortable with. And you can't create a new future with the same standards. So we've got to understand, where do I want to change? And when we look at success is never about luck. It's never about talent or how smart you are. It's about the standards you set and the actions you take. If you're stuck, you never wait for the right time. You raise your standards, you execute relentlessly, and you watch how fast your life will change. So when you look at standards, Mike, a lot of people mistake goals for standards. Goals are what you want. Standards are what you accept. So a goal is something you aspire to achieve, but a standard is the level at which you refuse to live below. Goals will always push you forward, but standards dictate your daily actions. Like, people have a goal to create, let's say they have a goal to get in great shape, but if they're inconsistent with their workouts and eat poorly, they're never going to get there, right? Or you may have a goal to create a successful business or to 10x your income this year. But if your standard tolerates inconsistency and excuses, success will always be out of your reach. When you raise your standards, you automatically elevate your results because you no longer tolerate anything less. But your financial situation, Mike, more than anything else, is tied to your standard. There's nothing else that it is tied to more than your standards of service, your standards of activities. But your financial situation isn't just about opportunity. It's about what you refuse to tolerate. If you want to earn more, we have to stop chasing money and start raising our standards. The moment you decide, enough is enough, my current income is no longer acceptable, that's when you activate standards and you take the actions necessary to create greater wealth. And high earners don't necessarily have bigger dreams. They stick to their dreams. They have bigger commitments. They have higher standards.
So when you start to evaluate your standards, is it always spurred by dissatisfaction? And are you always starting by looking at the results to look at the standards, or how are you evaluating them?
I always look at it by my emotional state, what I'm tolerating. What am I tolerating? Am I making excuses? So standards is an action, but it's a feeling too. Like, when you really set high standards for yourself, you're never checking the box. You're always looking at where I can get better. And what we have to understand, I said it earlier, your income will never exceed your standards, ever. So I want everyone to look at their income. That's the most honest reflection I could give you of your standards. Now, your financial reality is a direct reflection of what you're willing to accept. If you want to earn more, it's about raising your standards. Now let's go deeper into this, okay? Your income always matches your standards, not your potential, because we all have unlimited potential. If our income matched our potential, everyone would be crushing it. But that's not how it works. Many people are capable of earning 6, 7, 8, 9 figures, but they don't, because they have a standard of procrastination. They tolerate inconsistency and low effort work. And if you expect to be wealthy but tolerate excuses, distractions, or are obsessed with being comfortable in your comfort zone, you're always going to be separate from the person you want to be. The second you refuse to accept average effort, your results will rise. You know,
What? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this. Like, if you're around a high standard individual and then you bring a low standard individual in, they can't relate to each other. They can't speak the same language. They don't like being around each other. It's not because they think one's better, one's worse. You can't be in congruency.
And that actually goes really well with what I was about to ask you, because a lot of times your environment can have a lot to do with the standards that you set. For example, if you're hanging out with a group of people who are really fit and really into fitness, you're going to think twice before you order donuts or order something really unhealthy, because it's going to feel more uncomfortable if that's who you're hanging out with. Or likewise, if you're hanging out with people with a really low income, it's going to feel awkward to suddenly be a goal achiever going after a higher income. It's going to drag you down. So how important is your environment to setting standards?
Well, it's very important because the people you're around the most is who you become. I promise you, high standard individuals will not stay with low standard individuals, because high standard individuals eliminate low income habits. And if somebody is used to, for example, they have a high standard of discipline. Well, if somebody doesn't keep their word to that person, they're not going to want to keep hanging around with somebody who keeps over-promising and letting them down. But, you know, the difference in high standard and low standard, a high standard individual has a great habit of great value of work. Their work ethic is exceptional. A low standard individual settles for low value work. They settle for distractions and inconsistent actions. A high standard individuals are very careful with how they use their time. They're very careful with the energy of who they allow in their environment. And they're very careful and they're obsessed with their habits. They're constantly looking at their habits. But when a low individual wants to raise their standard, they can't. It's a decision. They make up their mind. Enough is enough. I'm not going to do this anymore. And they're going to start building the right disciplines, the right activities, the right commitments, and they're going to see their productivity just take off. But you know what happens when you raise your standard? Your skill set improves. You really fall in love with repetition of that one skill set that your goal demands. And you develop that skill set, and guess what follows? Financial rewards.
Okay, so how many times have you seen clients or just people say they're going to set a new standard and then fall to the old standard? And what is it that keeps you from doing that?
It's commitment. They never made up their mind they're going to do it. You know, so if you go and say, I dropped my standard, you never had a standard. It's like somebody who says, I lost my confidence. You never had confidence. It was artificial. Confidence is a knowingness, and it's not based on results. It's based on trusting yourself. It's based on believing yourself. But you'll see it all the time. If you don't set a standard and then create an action immediately after you set that standard, you're going to automatically default to your old programming. Mm-hmm. What we've got to understand is we have to break the addiction of being our old self. It is an addiction. So you've got to be conscious of your thinking. It all comes with awareness. You got to get conscious of not defaulting to that old program. And our program controls 95% of our day, every single one of us. 5% of our day is worked on goals, our aspirations, our desires. You know, I've got these high achievers on here say, no, I work more than 5%. You don't. You default to the program. That's the law. You know, the study of neuroscience and brain plasticity has taught us this. So it's down to an exact science. But what if we made standard part of our automatic program? Now you're using that 95%, and that's where you're crushing it. But look at the marketplace. What does it value? The marketplace values impact. It doesn't value how many hours somebody works. It values what they do with those hours. You don't get paid for working hard. You get paid for the value you're bringing to the marketplace. And if your standard is just work hard, work hard, work hard, I promise you, you're going to stay in a low income cycle, because all you're going to earn is based on trading your time for money. So a great question to ask ourselves for anybody that wants to raise their standard of value is, how can I increase my value? How can I solve bigger problems? And so when we start asking that, that's where everything changes for us.
In case those listening need a reason to implement standard, what would you say is the price you pay for not raising your standards?
Mediocrity, regret, not fulfilling your potential. There's a lot of prices. Standards are the best. I mean, standards have changed my life more than anything. Before I even knew what standards were, I had an unconscious standard. Like everyone listening to this has a standard, but is that standard outdated? Is that standard your old self? Are you in the standard of I'm doing well enough? Are you here to do well enough? Or are you here to continue to get better and better and better? That's what standard is. Whenever somebody tells me this is hard, what they're telling me is this: I have a low standard right now, and it's not congruent to my programming. So it's okay, it's hard. To change a program takes time. Mm-hmm. But once you change, hard becomes easy. Think about when we first learned how to drive a car. Our hands were both hands on the wheel. Now, after years, it's like, oh God, I don't even know how I got home. It's so automatic. Well, your standard becomes automatic. But the marketplace always meets you where your standards are, always. And that's why standard always wins.
I know you have some great stories with standard. Why don't you share a personal story where standard has really stuck out?
I always use this story because I'm a huge Dallas Cowboys fan. Anyway, I was coming to meet you, Mikey, for a meeting. And my wife was with me, and all the hotels were sold out. And we went to this hotel, and it was not up to my standards. And I told my wife, I'm like, let's switch hotels. And she said, we're only going to be here for 2 nights. We can do this. And I listened to her, and I'm like, no, I don't think so. So I called my brother, and I said, what hotels do you recommend in Dallas? I don't care if I have to drive 45 minutes. So anyhow, we're driving. We get this hotel. Mike, what was the hotel called? Do you remember?
Rosewood, wasn't it?
Rosewood, yes. So we're driving to the Rosewood, and the driver who was driving us ended up being Dak Prescott's driver. And he said, where you guys are staying, 2 people are always there. And I said, who's there? And he said, it's Troy Aikman is always there, and Jerry Jones is always there. And for people who don't know, the owner of the Cowboys. So we get in the room, and it's a super nice hotel. Like, I was very happy about that. And we end up, we didn't want to go out to dinner. We said, let's go down to the bar and get something to eat. Well, we sit down, and I'm sitting there. Because it's a dark room, I don't even recognize it. Literally 5 feet away, Jerry Jones is there. And I don't even pick up that it's him. My wife picks up it's him. So she goes, you'd like to meet him, wouldn't you? And I said, yeah, I'd love to meet him, but I didn't want to go up to him because I didn't want to bother him. I'm like, he has 3 bodyguards around. So I'm looking at the bodyguards, and I said, go to the bodyguards first. And she went up to him. Then she went up and talked to him. He spent 15 minutes with us talking about life. And the first thing he asked us was about our family. And so we go back to eating, and then he ends up buying our meal. And then he spends another 10 minutes talking to us. And I said to my wife at this point, do you see what I mean? Standard always wins. And I told you the same thing. I called you afterwards. But I have some wild stories about standard, like how much standard has changed my life. Yeah. When I left my corporate world, I had enough is enough. And that was the moment I changed my standard. And look what followed. Everything followed. All of a sudden, I was in all this debt. Then a few years later, I was completely free. I believe standard is the most important quality we can ever develop. And I always say this, if you have 100 successful people in a room, they will have gotten their success with different recipes. But the one commonality out of all 100 is the standard is always the standard is always the standard. And that's why I want everybody to learn this, because the moment you decide that good enough is no longer good enough, that's when everything changes. The moment you decide to stop settling, you start growing, and the world begins to respond to the best version of you. And I want everybody to be, do, and have everything they want to be, do, and have. But we've got to open our mind to possibilities, but we've got to build the right parts of our character. Standard becomes your character. Just like attitude affects everything around us, standard affects everything around us. So what are you settling for? Are you sick and tired of settling for that? Make a decision, draw a line in the sand and say, enough is enough. I am not going to operate from this moment on below this. And every time your old program comes in and says, this will be cheaper, or this will be the easiest way out, say no. When you start, what you're saying yes to is your standard. So watch currently what you're saying yes to, and you'll know where your standard is set.
You know, you mentioned that you were at a point where you said enough is enough, and that's actually a good place to be. Do you think that a lot of times people are too tolerant? And why do you think people are so tolerant?
Because they constantly settle. They accept lesser goals because they're letting the outside world control what they think about inside. So they're dropping themselves, but the attitude is very ass backwards. What we have to do is choose a standard of living we want and raise our results to that standard of living. But most of the population is bringing their standard down to their current set point. But they don't understand that they can change that. It's such a bad idea. And I used to do it when I was struggling. So I have a good authority on this. When I was letting the outside world control me, it controlled all my attention. So of course I was going to create similar results. But when I became aware enough and got the right tutelage in the right direction to stop letting the outside dictate and start thinking greater than my results, start thinking greater than my environment, all of a sudden, everything changed around me. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to do. We have to refuse to lower our standards. It isn't about being perfect. It's about being committed to your highest potential. Every day, we're at this fork in the road. We're either choosing comfort or we're choosing our dreams. Every time we choose comfort, we're saying no to our dreams. Every single time. Every time we hesitate, we say no to our dreams. So what we have to do, if we want to achieve our goals, the goals are useless without the proper standards. If I have a worthy goal, that's great, but I have low standards, I'm not going to achieve the goal. Mm-hmm. Standards are essential, and I want everyone to look at their standards and look, what is not working for you? Where is it in your life that enough is enough? Like if you're creating the similar income that you've been creating, I'm telling you the formula, raise your standard. You watch what's going to change around you.
Uh-huh. What is the relationship between standard and identity?
Well, the standard creates the identity creates the results. But standard sheds our old identity. That's the beautiful part of standards. It literally, the old you dies away. Mm-hmm. But it always starts standard. You can't create a new identity with low standards. So if you want to raise your identity, you have to raise your standards. Your identity will automatically shift, and your identity will automatically change your results.
And what would you say is the fastest, lowest resistance way to install a new standard?
Decide. You've got to make up your mind. And don't let your current results make up your mind. I want you to think, how do I want to live? What do I want to earn? How healthy do I want to be? Start setting great boundaries for yourself, but you've got to be disciplined with standards. You've got to draw that line in the sand. And even when you want to say no to something, but that's not the standard that you committed to, say yes. I promise you, everything around you will work in your favor. Mm-hmm.
The reminders of, your goal and where you want to be in 90 days or a year that you're feeding yourselves every single day in the morning, right when you wake up, right before you go to bed, when you're doing your auto suggestion. How important are those to reminding you why you're raising your standards?
Well, all the time. Your why will drive you. If you don't have a big why, you're going to give up at the soonest sign of adversity. So, I want you to think about your goal all day long. I want it to be automatic, a part of your standard that I'm a goal achiever. Any goal I set, I achieve. Now, I don't know how, I don't know when, but I know I'm going to do it. See, when you have that, that is supreme confidence. There's only one person, Mike, that we have to convince, and it's ourselves. There's only one person in this world that I have to convince, and it's me. If I convince that person, that's the only person I have to convince. You have to build mental toughness though. Everybody wants the results of the top 1%, but they're not willing to do what the top 1% do. What do? They do it immediately. They don't take actions based on their results. They let their vision drive us. Like if you don't have a great morning routine, you're gonna default to your past self. That's what most people woke up this morning and they just went, I'm going to be in traffic, or I got to do this meeting. Then you got that real outlier, that real top 1% who spends the first hour reprogramming their mind. They're focused on building a much better future, bigger future, and a much more fulfilling life.
So good. Arash, is there anything that we haven't touched on yet on standard that you really wanted to cover?
Standard is our code of ethics. It is our character. And stop living a standard that is not you. Start living a standard that you are proud of. I want you to be able to look in the mirror every night and say, regardless of results, I did my best today. I operated with excellent standards. But I will tell you this, standards will change your life. If you elevate your standards, you watch in 30 days how much your environment has changed, how much your outcomes have changed. But let's hold ourselves to think greater than our current results, think greater than our current environment, because everything is about upgrading, constantly be in upgrade mode.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get into an action step for today.
I would like you all to observe yourself and say, when have I created great standards and what was the outcome from them? And then whenever I did default to my old program and accepted less, what happened? And I want you to understand that so you know the reason why to do this. Don't believe me, test it for yourself. I live this way. I've lived this way for a long time. But I will tell you, standard will always win. Pick standards, raise your life, and watch how effortless life will start becoming for you.
I love it. Thank you, Arash, and thanks to all of you. I think this turned out to be a fantastic episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a rating and a review, and most importantly, share this with your friends and family or tag us on social media. And we'll see you next week for another episode of the 7-Figure Standard Podcast. Thanks, Arash.
Thanks, Mikey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 7-Figure Standard. We hope you found the insights and strategies helpful on your journey to success. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform to help us reach more people like you. To learn more about Arash and Mikey and how Voss Coach & Co. can help you achieve your goals and reach new levels of success, visit vosscoachandco.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of 7-Figure Standard.